greetings. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Wanda Briscoe Ministries for a pop up conversation on grief and loss. On tonight, I have a special guest that will be joining me on tonight. When you're coming in, if you could please put in the comment section the city and the state that you're logging in from, I would greatly appreciate it. And so, without further ado, I'm going to bring on my special guest, and that is Pastor Jacqueline Duncan. Will you all please greet her in the comments? Say welcome, put some claps, whatever you need to do. We're streaming live on YouTube as well. I just thank God for this divine connection with Pastor Jacqueline Duncan. We first talked on the phone a couple of weeks ago, and it was just like I was talking to an old friend. It was so comfortable speaking with her on the phone. We stayed on the phone for over an hour. So, and I just thank, Dr. Nikkei Natson,
Yes.
divine connection. Dr. Nikkei and her husband, Dr. Alton, they're in Dallas, Texas, and I just honor them greatly and just thank them for the connection with Dr. Jacqueline. And it's just been a blessing just talking with her on grief and loss and just talking with her in general. So on tonight, we're just going to have a pop-up conversation on grief and loss because so many people think grief and loss is just about a death, the physical death. But grief and loss is so vast. Would you agree
Yes.
with that? It can be the loss of a job, the loss of a pet, the loss of a relationship, the loss of a friendship, or if you've gone through a divorce, the loss of a marriage, or as for me, I'm a breast cancer survivor, so I went through the loss of my parts of my body. If someone has a prosthesis, it could be loss of a limb. So it's so much to grief and loss. So welcome everyone to Pastor Jacqueline Duncan. If you could just tell us all a little bit about yourself.
Amen. Well, grace and peace to each and every one of you. I'm just super excited to be on here with you, Evangelist Wanda Briscoe. It is such an honor just to be in your presence on tonight. Yes, we did have a conversation, about 2 weeks ago, and it was like we have been known. It was called Kindred Spirits. And so I'm just so glad that, what you're doing in the community concerning grief and loss. It is really impacting the community. And I'm so excited on what God is going to do in this collaboration where we can help not only the world, but help our brothers and sisters in the kingdom to let them know that it's okay to grieve. It's okay to understand the process of what grief and loss is all about. And you said it's so great that it's not just a loved one, it's a loss of a pet. I had a dog that I had for 9 years and was gone away with my brother taking care of him. And my pet, my dog, Jeremiah, died on me. And, I didn't know how to process it. I was crying in an event with my sister-in-law in Texas. And they were looking at me like I was crazy. But no, it was my pet. So these things do happen, and we're just, we want to talk to each and every one who's listening on tonight to let you know that we do understand the different things that you may be experiencing. And let me just tell you who I am. I like getting involved in talking about grief and loss, so please forgive me for not introducing myself. I am Pastor Jacqueline Duncan. I am the wife of Apostle Philip G. Duncan. I am the mother of Shekinah Duncan and the bonus mother of Jamar Duncan. And so I actually am a counselor as well as a coach. I do counsel teen moms. I also counsel PTSD veterans. I counsel those who are just struggling and trying to figure out the next in their lives and so forth. And so I love doing what I do. And so again, thank you Evangelist Wanda, for having me.
You're welcome, Pastor Jackie. I truly appreciate you. And know we have a lot of new people on, so let me just briefly say who I am. I am Evangelist Wanda Briscoe. I am a certified grief and loss counselor with the National Association of Christian Counselors. And just briefly, how my grief journey started. Even though I'm a breast cancer survivor, I went through a little grief there, 3 surgeries and, different things like that. But the hardest part of grief was on December 3rd, 2018, when my youngest son was murdered in Atlanta, Georgia. He was 22 years old. He was shot 12 times and grazed by 3 bullets. And so I didn't know how to process it. There wasn't any guidelines. You go to the church and you're like, what do I do? And for me, I couldn't get any help. And people, the typical religious scriptures, joy cometh in the morning. Those, yeah, we do understand joy comes in the morning, but your morning may not be that day after your
Exactly.
death. Your morning may not be the next month. Your morning may not even be the next year. And so I went into a deep depression because I didn't know how to process it. I didn't have the tools. I didn't have any resources to help me with that. And then having to travel from Maryland to Atlanta to, deal with preliminary hearings and everything. And then the murder trial didn't even happen until October of 2023. So
Wow.
5 years I went through that. And then a friend of mine became a certified Christian counselor, and she told me about a theological school, Dominion, and they offered online classes. And she said, I think the grief and loss course will be good for you. And so I took that, and it was a grueling 8 weeks because it was raw, and it made you unlearn things that you thought was grief and loss. And then it came from the biblical aspect on what it is, what it isn't. People will tell you don't cry or you shouldn't be grieving like that, but even Jesus wept. Jesus
Yeah.
cried for Lazarus. And
Yes.
we tend to forget those things sometime, that Jesus also had a human part of himself. And so from that, from taking that course, people started coming to me, Wanda, we need your help. I've dealt with a lot of traumas in my life, and God, was victorious in all of them. And even in the grief and loss, God has graced me with this ministry to counsel a lot of leaders and to get, because there isn't a ministry in the churches on grief and loss. So, Dr. Jackie, what is grief and loss to you?
Well, that's a great question, Evangelist Wanda. Grief and loss to me is basically when your emotions are out of control. I would say, the different things that I've experienced in life, not just the death of my loved ones, my mother, my father, my, close friends, and so forth. It basically put a check on my emotional state. It made me to basically re-examine what I'm feeling. And it also helped me to understand the process of it. The way that I was processing it, it was okay to cry. It was okay to deny. It was okay to be angry. It was okay to, to go through the process of it, but it was not okay to stay there. And so when I think about grief and loss, it basically just does something to my emotional state, and it basically cripples me. It causes me to stop moving forward when I know I need to. I
Yes.
think I shared with you when my mother passed. Um, it was, I mean, when you lose your mom, I'm telling you, because you actually was are so connected to her.
Mhm.
And my mom, she was very close to us, all her children. When she passed, it just did something to me, where I had to basically understand that I couldn't stay in the state that I was in. And so the Lord began to tell me, because I felt myself going into a deep depression,
Mhm.
a dark place that I did not want to go into. And so the Lord began to tell me, this spirit of grief is trying to take you out. And I had to realize that I can process it by the different stages of grief, but I can't allow it to take me out. And so when the Lord told me that, He told me, I need you to get up and not allow it to take you out. And so a lot of us, we grieve differently. It depends on the individual. I can't say, okay, you got, 3 months and you need to get over it. No,
Mhm.
I can't tell you that, okay, 3 years, you need to get over it. Guess what? It's been 10 years and I still grieve
Yes.
loss of my mother. I still grieve loss of my father, and it's been 30 years.
Yes.
But I don't stay there. And that's what I think, that if we can just let the audience know that it is a process, but we can't tell you how long it's going to take for you.
That's good. And I like that you said you can't stay there. So I always tell people that you need to grieve healthy. And the my son was murdered in 2018. And so he was murdered in December. And December has always been my favorite time of the year, Christmas. So I refused to celebrate Christmas and put up lights and all of that after he, was murdered. And so when I started getting counseling, and that's another thing I want to talk about later on, is about counseling. I put up a tree in 2020. That was my first time. But then I connected with an organization in the DMV called RISPA Network. And they help families that have dealt with homicides. And they had an event in Tennessee, which was in December. And they asked me to speak. And I was like, oh my goodness. And I went and I spoke. And I'm fresh. I was the baby out of all of the mothers that was there speaking, because here I was just 2 years into this, and I spoke and I told them, you have to get through it, turn that pain into purpose, turn
Yes.
it into something. And so I had written a few books before my son was murdered, and then I wrote more after he was murdered. So I started journaling even more after he was murdered. That became like a outlet for me, is writing things down. But you have to turn that pain into purpose. I mean, I've come in contact with people who have still staying in that grief state, and it's
Yeah.
been 10 years,
Yes.
15 years, and they're still stuck. They
Yes.
are still stuck. And I tell them, start a nonprofit organization, whatever, if they died of a specific cancer or something, link up with that cancer organization, be a spokesperson, or, participate, but you got to get through it.
Yes.
You can't stay stuck in there. And then, so much in the church, when we talk about Psalms 23, and it says, yea, though I walk through,
The
the word
valley.
through is right there, but
Yes.
when it comes to us personally, we tend to forget that word through. So, and especially as leaders. And then so when I first started counseling, so many leaders was coming to me, and I was like, God, what am I to do? Seasoned leaders, and God had to check me, because I was like, well, this person is an apostle. Why are they coming to me? I'm just, you know, a little old evangelist, that's how I was looking at it. But, God said, I can trust you with this. And then that's what I think, with the different ministries that God gives us, He has to trust you, because souls are at stake.
Yes.
And these people, I'm accountable for these people. I can't lead them astray and say, oh, your mother or your father has been dead for 10 years. Get over it. I can't do that.
No, no.
I have to walk this walk with them, pray with them, and give them the tools to learn how to grieve healthy. So, as a leader, as you're a pastor, how would you deal with someone in your church that is grieving? Do you recommend counseling, or what type of advice would you give them?
Well, I, as a pastor and as a counselor, I do recommend counseling. I mean, I would say, Evangelist Wanda, maybe 10 years ago, I wouldn't recommend counseling. It's because of what was taught to me. You got to have faith. You got to, you just got to tough it up and different things like that. But now, because I know better, I would recommend counseling, and it's up to them whether they take it or not. Some people will think that they don't need the counseling, but then you may have some that will, take up what you said as far as getting the counseling. And basically just being patient and understanding, the process, understanding their emotional state, their behavior, their attitude, knowing that they just lost someone. We actually have 3 people in our ministry within the last, I believe, 6 months that have lost a dear mother or husband. And so my first thing is, hey, I think you may need counseling. And then just walking alongside them because you've experienced loss before.
Yes.
If I hadn't experienced loss, I wouldn't understand. But because I understand it, I am, like you said, walking them through. I don't
Yes.
want them to get stuck.
No.
Because I know how it feels to be stuck. And so walking them through, giving them time to process things. We as pastors, we have a lot on us. And so we have to just ask God for that grace that we can give the grace to them. And so that's what I would do as a pastor who is someone who does deal with clients who have grief and loss.
And see, and that's an advantage that you have, a dual role. You're a pastor and you're a counselor. So that is very important, in that aspect. And so it's important for people to grieve healthy and to even understand what grief is, because you can have grief from the loss of a friendship. Like say if you had a best friend for 30 years or something, and something happens and forgiveness was offered, but a lot of times forgiveness does not mean reconciliation. And
absolutely
tend to tell people in the church world, yes, forgive them, and you got to go back, eat dinner, invite them up. No, over your house. No, forgiveness does not mean reconciliation, and that's very important, because you're telling someone, okay, go back and deal with that hurt. And
yes
and that's toxic,
yes
very toxic. And we have
yes
to be careful what we're doing with that. And so I want people to understand that you have to grieve healthy. You have to process it. Some people will just act like it didn't happen. Some
exactly
people will take on things like become an addict to different things, whether it's alcoholism or food or just different things to try and take their mind off of
yes
not processing. But you have to process it, because later on down the line, it's going to come back. It's going to
it
show
will
up in
it
your
will
behavior. It may show up in your behavior with your family. It may show up in your behavior at your job, and you don't want to lose your job over acting out. So, and especially with men, because women are more emotional, so how would you deal, what advice could you tell a male who, doesn't want to like let his emotions out, because they may feel that's not the manly thing to do, to keep it in. Because a lot of times, coming up in our community, you tell the mothers will tell the sons, don't cry,
yes
boys don't cry, and
yes
they grow up with that mentality. that I'm a man, I can't
Yes.
cry. So what would you tell them?
Well, that's a great question as well, because I actually deal with men that have PTSD.
Mm,
And I have one, particular person that I actually, counsel, and they had a death in their family. And it's been probably about 10 to 15 years. And I was able to let them see why certain behaviors were behaviors, because of them never dealing with the spirit of grief of losing their loved one.
yeah.
And so I gave them the opportunity to sit there. I gave them some tissue. Cry, honey.
Cry,
Cry.
let it out.
Let it out. But you could tell, because he was a man, that he did not really want to let it out. And I'm like, no, give yourself permission to cry, even being a man, because guess what? It's releasing you. And
Yeah.
by the time we finished our session, he was so relieved,
Mm,
and he thanked me and my husband for just being there to help him through the process. So, men that are out there, men, we know you hurt too.
yes. Yes. It's okay to cry.
It's okay to cry. You're not going to be judged.
No.
You're not going to be judged. Your parents may have judged you when you were 10, 15, but guess what? When you come into our office, Wanda, Lady Wanda, excuse me, Evangelist Wanda, and Pastor Jacqueline's office, we gonna push you to cry.
Yes, you gotta get it out. Those tears are cleansing, and
Yeah.
you can't keep it bottled in. And one thing about when you're going through therapy and counseling, you think you're coming in there for grief and loss,
Yes.
and it becomes like a big box has been opened, because then you start dealing with some other things that you've suppressed through your childhood, that you
Yeah.
may have also grieved, like grieving or the loss of attention from a,
Yes.
those things tend to come out during grief and loss
Yes.
counseling. And
Yes.
people have suppressed that for years and years. And then they're like, wow, I didn't know that I've been holding on to this for 20, 30 years.
Yes. Yes.
Rejection,
Yes.
abandonment, those
Yes.
are things that come out in
Yes.
grief and loss counseling. And so you think you're coming in there for one thing, and then you're going to end up getting healed and delivered from so much more.
Yes, absolutely. And you're so right. I mean, especially rejection. Rejection basically deals with your emotions and your significance. And if you feel that you're being rejected, you are going to feel some kind of way, and it's going to cause, grief. It's going to cause some type of grief. You're not going to feel like you're good enough, that, people may look over you. You're going to feel like no one sees you, and you're going to feel like you have been devalued, and so forth. And that goes along with that grief and loss as well. And,
Yes.
so many of us just look at grief and loss as a loved one. But like you said earlier, it could be, and we talked about this, you and I have a twin brother,
Yeah.
and I cannot talk to him the way I used to. It's because he had a cardiac arrest in January of last year. And so it kind of, took away that independence, I would just say, for him to pick up the phone call to call me. And so I feel grief in that and loss.
Because you
Is
missed the
because
calls.
I miss the calls. I
Mhm.
missed all those calls that he would call, and we would joke with my husband and stuff. And guess what? That's a part of grief and loss as well.
Yes.
You even said about losing a home, losing a career.
Yes.
Those things still line up with the grief and loss. Although, losing a loved one is traumatic, of course, we know we don't ever want to lose a loved one. But there are other things, divorce, you
Yes.
know, divorce. You may not have lost him going to heaven or anything, but you've lost that connection. You've lost the financial stability, all of those things can end up causing you to have an emotional burnout.
And that's so true, Pastor Jackie. I'm been divorced. I'm never remarried. It's going on 13 years now, and that you do grieve when you're going through a divorce. Because you have those connections. Those people that you're around, the couples that you hung out with, and different things, the family connections. And then a lot of times when people divorce, people take sides.
Yes.
And then, especially if it's an ugly and a public divorce like mine was, you go through that grief part and you're wondering, like, how can you take sides? I've been with you, that person's character or whatever. People do it. And then you go through that, because then, especially if you have children and then they get caught up, in a divorce fight or custody fight and battle and stuff, it's a lot. And even with the breast cancer journey, there were a lot of people at the cancer center when I was there who went through grief and loss. I've been around women who've had mastectomies. They were married and they come home and there's a note on the bed from a husband: I can't deal with this.
Wow.
And they left them. And in the cancer
Wow.
community, that's called the cancer kiss off. And I always talk about
Wow.
October, because men are groomed to be helpers, and this is something that they can't help per se with, and they're visual. And there were a lot of women in there. I mean, I went through a divorce when I went through breast cancer, so didn't have my significant other at that time to help me with my cancer journey. So you grieve that part, parts of your body. I know people that have lost limbs, and you lose that because you have that phantom spirit of people that are watching. They understand what that is, where that limb, sometimes it'll jolt and it'll feel like that nerve or that part of that body is still there. And then it brings back up, oh, I've lost my leg, or I've lost my arm or finger or whatever. That's a part of grief and loss as well. And we just want people to understand that it's okay to get help. It's
Yes.
okay to cry. It's okay to reach out, but you got to get through the process and not stay stuck in it.
Yes, absolutely. And so I'm just so excited on just this conversation because, the church does really don't have these conversations.
No.
And so we have vowed to, get the word out to people that it's okay to go through the process of the grief and the loss, and to understand that, you were telling me when we were talking that it was like a twofold. Some people are going through grief and loss of a loved one, but then also, like you were saying, of divorce as well.
Yes.
So that's like a double whammy.
Yes. Double whammy.
Yes, and so I know it's more harder, for people to even process that. But I believe if you find, that support system, like you said that you have a support system when you had breast cancer and so forth. I really believe that people got to understand that there is a support system. It's so many support systems out here.
Yes,
You
it is.
just got to connect to it. If
Mhm.
you connect to a support system, you see that you're not the only one, because that's what happens with us when we're going through grief and loss. We think we're the only ones, but we're not. When we lost our mother, we were like, we thought we were the only ones. Our life stopped, our world stopped, but the world kept going, according to other people. And so you have to find someone that you can connect to, that can basically share with you that I've been there
Yeah.
and now I'm here,
Yeah.
and that you're going to make it. That God is not going to allow you to stay there
No.
if you don't want to. He's going to continue to give you the desires of your heart. He's going to continue to let you know that there's purpose for your life, there's potential, and so forth, especially when those who have had a husband who passed, or wives who've passed, sometimes they just stop and don't dream anymore.
Yeah.
But be like Joseph and dream again.
Dream, live again. My motto when I was diagnosed with breast cancer, and then God birthed ministry from that.
Yes.
And my motto when I started doing the talk shows and all of that was live out loud.
Wow.
Live out loud. And then when I was going through my breast cancer journey, God gave me, I always tell people, Isaiah wrote this for me in the Bible, and it's Isaiah 66:9. And I love the New Century Version. And it says, I will not cause pain without allowing something new to be born, saith the
Wow.
Lord. So, out of my pain from breast cancer, divorce, and the murder of my son, God
Yeah.
continues to birth newness and
Wow.
kingdom connections. And God continues to show people, I brought her through all of that. So he can do the same with you, with anyone that's watching. God can bring newness out of your pain. You can take that pain and turn it into purpose. I am a living example of that. It's like, you done gone, I'm like Jobette. I done gone through it. It's like, okay, I done gone through everything. It's like finances, bankruptcy, foreclosure, breast cancer, divorce, murder. It's like, okay,
Wow. Wow.
okay,
And you're
God,
still
still
standing.
standing.
But even in that, God still will perfect those things that concern you.
Yes.
And so, I mean, if we can just continue to stand and be unmovable, to know that God sees us. He sees the heart, even the heart that's broken now because of a loss of a loved one. He
Yeah.
sees the struggle. He sees the financial difficulties that you may be experiencing. He sees you confused, trying to figure out what's next.
Yeah.
God will perfect those things that concern us. He is not going to leave us out there for no reason at all. He's going to always make sure that we acknowledge Him in all our ways, and He will direct our path. So, um, I just believe, every one of us is going to go through some type of grief and loss. I mean, everybody on.
Everybody.
I believe it is, how you process it or how you react to it is going to be the key for you to get through it.
Tasha Page Lockhart had a song. Well, she has a song, and it came out around 2020, and it's called Why Not Me? And a lot of
Mm,
times when things happen, we will say, God, why is this happening to me? And it's a beautiful song. So for the listeners, go and, look up that song. It's called Why Not Me? It's by Tasha Page Lockhart. And it's like, why not me? God, you can use this. Don't be doom and gloom. Be like, God, why did you do this? Yeah, it's okay to get angry, but be angry and sin not.
exactly.
Yeah, you can yell, get in your car and you yell at God, God, why did you take my son? Or why did you take my mother? Or this or that? God, I thought you was going to heal them. But God is all knowing, all knowing. We can get
Yes.
angry, but sin not. And the song is Why Not Me? And when I
Yeah.
listened to that song, it just made everything in perspective, with everything that I've even gone through, all the stages of grief and loss, and even the various forms of grief and loss in
Yes.
my life. Why not me? For God to use it to get the glory out of it and to
Yeah.
help other people. And so you also have to get through it. And that also means changing your mindset.
Yes.
And that's very important. So, can you speak to the mindset of how to get through it?
Well, I'm just going to give you my experience. I actually had to basically just stay in prayer. I had to stay in prayer and I had to stay in the word. That's what shifted my mindset and gave me the peace. I'm telling you, the peace of God that passeth all understanding. I mean, once you get that peace from God, you good. Once I received the peace to understand that this too shall pass, that all things are working together for my good. I didn't understand, Lord, how could this work together for
Yeah.
my good? But guess what? I'm able to talk about it. I'm able to share with other women, other men when they lose a mother, when they lose a father. You know, they say you're an orphan when you lose both parents.
Yes.
And, and so I'm able to stand and basically show them an example of going through and not being stuck. And so my mindset shifted when I started reading the Word of God and started trusting in that God knew this before it even happened. And He knew that I would be able to get through it. And so that's basically how I was able to get through it. And I'm reminded of Job, how Job went through so much
So
too.
much.
Oh my God. Then he had his friends to come and start telling him, oh, you must have did this. And that's what people may even won't tell you, but they may think it.
Yeah.
Why is she going through so much? She must have been sinning. She must have been
Yes.
doing this. She
Mhm.
must have been doing that. Get rid of your Job friends.
Get rid of your Job friends. Somebody need to put that in the comments. Get rid of your Job friends. Exactly.
Yes,
Yes.
yes, because they will push you into depression
Yeah.
because then you will start believing what they're saying because it'll get into your spirit because you're already down. Why are you going to come and bring some more negative and poison in my life?
And that's why it's so important to know who's around you and to have a support system.
Yes,
Not even just in grief and loss, but just in general, but
in general.
especially in grief and loss. And when you mention that when you lose both parents, you're known, the terminology is orphan. And that's something, even though grief and loss is not talked about in the church, as counselors, we know about the orphan spirit.
Yes,
And with that, you have to know about deliverance. That's
yeah,
why I said grief and loss is so vast. And you very rarely hear people talk about the orphan spirit. That
yes,
can linger and
yes.
that can go over into other things, addicts and different things in your life because most people don't even know about an orphan spirit. Like,
Yes,
come on, church, come on. You
yes, and
got
it
to know this.
yes. And it takes deliverance. I'm telling you, it takes deliverance. And like you were saying, I believe every biblical counselor should know about deliverance.
Yes.
Because there are going to be some people that come into your office. You're going to see one thing, and then God may show you some other things that they need to be delivered from, from rejection or from molestation or
Yes.
from, my uncle raped me when I was 10. It's so many different things, like you said, that even comes to knowing about the grief and the loss. You losing your virginity, because of an uncle or because
Yes.
of an aunt. That can be some grief and loss as well.
Yes.
And we, like you said, it's so vast that we can go
Yeah.
on and talk about this, but people don't even, when they think of grief and loss, they think of a loved one passing, but they
That's
don't think about nothing else. And so I believe that we'll be able to help them to understand, even when that loved one passed, you never dealt with the one grief and loss before this loved one passed.
yeah.
And so that's why it's taking you harder to process it because there were some other things that you had to deal with before you got here. And
That's
so it's just so much, that we as therapists, counselors, pastors, that we got to help them to process. And so, yeah.
and that's true. And also unforgiveness always comes up.
Yes.
And you have the 5 stages of grief, that's in the medical field. But when I counsel people, it's like that underlying, that unforgiveness lingers there. And then that has to be deliverance from that. As deliverance has to come as part of grief and loss as well. And I just thank God that God has always given me things to write about, like to be the first. Like I was the first to be diagnosed with breast cancer in my family. And then I wrote about it. And then God had birth ministry and had me start educating people on breast cancer. I was driving at the time, I was living in Atlanta when I was diagnosed, driving from Atlanta to Maryland twice a month, talking at churches and helping people understand, especially in our community, about grief and loss. I mean, about breast cancer. And even with grief and loss, God has graced me to write SOP, standard operating procedures,
Yes, yes,
for churches to have bereavement ministry in their churches. And I just thank God for that, because, I talk to pastors and then, they're like, well, can you help us start a bereavement
yes,
ministry in our church? And we don't have that. And I'm like, wow, out of what I didn't have, what I needed, God birthed me to write SOPs to help other ministries. And I'm just thankful for that God can take what you've gone through and use
yes,
it for his glory.
yes. And I want to thank you so much because you sent it to me, and I am going to use it because it's very simple.
Yeah.
Very simple. And I love the part when you basically was sharing, and if you don't mind sharing this,
Mhm.
what to say and what not to say.
Yes, yes, yes. The simple things, the cliches that the church people will
Yes,
say, don't cry. And we have to be careful, as those leaders, in ministry, things to say and things to not say, especially when you've lost a child, and if you have other children, I'm a boy mom, I had three, I still have to say, I have three sons. And
mm-hmm.
it's just terminology that I had to learn. And then you have people that will say, well, at least you have other sons. You don't say that.
Don't
Or
say.
a parent has, or from a woman has miscarried, she's tried, has some infertility issues. You can't say, well, you're young, at least you can try again. You don't
Don't
say
say
that.
that.
And, it's like God was just giving me that stuff. And I was just writing it down, writing it down. Okay, things to say, things to not say. And then when I would show it to leaders, so I've even had some leaders that would say, I've said those things on the
Yes,
not to say
yes.
part.
We all have.
Yeah.
We all have. He's in a better place.
God needed
Uh,
him or her as a rose in his rose garden. Now, what scripture is it in the Old Testament or the New Testament that God has a rose garden? I didn't read that. So tell me where that
yes.
scripture is.
Yes, I mean it's so important though, Evangelist Wanda, just to let people know these are some of the things you don't say.
Yeah.
These are the things you do say, to comfort them. And I actually, when I was going through with the loss of my mother, she's no longer in pain. I mean, just so many different things, and I was like, that didn't help me for you to tell me that it didn't help me.
No.
I'd rather you just be quiet
Yeah.
and just be in my presence.
Yeah.
And don't ask me also, is there anything I can do for you? I don't know at that time. And
No.
so what I
Just do it. Bring me food.
yes,
Do
yes,
something.
yes. Send me a plant. You know I like plants. Send me some fruit if you know I like fruit. Don't just, is there anything I can do for you? No, just do it. Don't ask me because there's a lot you can do for me, but
Yeah.
I am confused at this time.
Your mind is going different ways. And so I also tell people, like, if you have children, take the children to school, take them to an after school activity. That parent or the parents, they're not thinking about, okay, Jane got pom poms or this one got football at 5 o'clock. They're not
Right.
thinking about that kind of stuff. They're thinking about, okay, is there a will? Is there a policy? The funeral home is calling. Is it
Yes.
going to be a closed casket? You need to come pick out the casket. It's going to be cremation. Then you got to get to church. It's so much, and your mind is not there.
Yes.
People
Yes.
ask, then you got the nosy people. Well, how did he or she die?
Right. You don't ask people
You
that.
ask people that.
That's none of your business.
No. I mean, I've had people, even when I was with breast cancer, and I wrote about this in my first book, as someone said to me, well, at least they caught it early. That wasn't, I went through 33 rounds of radiation, 3 beams at each session. My body was touched 99 times by radiation.
Wow.
And you're going to say to me, at
At
least they
least
caught
they
it
caught it.
early. You don't say that.
Yeah.
You don't
Yeah.
say that to people. And even with my son, people like if you say, well, my child, he was shot 12 times and 3 bullets grazed him. So that's a total of 15 bullets. And people at the beginning, well, I know so and so was shot 5 times and they lived. I don't want to hear that.
No.
Just insensitive. It's like if you don't know what to say, just say, I'm going to pray for you. I'll keep you in prayer. And stop with the cliches. Think before you open your mouth and say something that's insensitive.
I agree. I totally agree. And again, I think this is so important, for churches, those pastors' wives
Yeah.
that are watching, those pastors that are watching. I think it's so important that we understand and know what's going to help, what's not going to help. Just being there, your presence being there. You can touch the person, hold the person's hand. I'm here for you. You don't have to say anything else, and it'll be okay. Just allow the person to process things because right now, while they're in the shock, they're
Mhm.
still in shock.
Yes.
While they are moving through the funeral arrangements and everything, they're still in shock. Once everything is over with and they go home by themselves, that's when you need to call.
I always say that's when that depression really sinks in. And even with the funeral home, this is something that they taught us in the grief and loss class. The funeral home is a business. Their business is for you to come. They take care of the funeral arrangements, the casket, you pick it out, the opening and closing and all of that. They are not there for the funeral to sit and hold your hand and to hug you, or to, some of them don't even bring you tissue when they're standing up there. And that's what we come in as grief and loss counselors. And I
Yes.
wrote that in the SOPs. If you can attend the funeral, sit with that person. And a year after my son was murdered, I wrote an open letter called Sitting on the Front Row, and I got it trademarked last year to use further in some projects. And it gives a whole new perspective on sitting on that front row, because you will pay big money for a concert or a football game to get down front to sit on that front row. But when that loved one is in front of you in a casket and you're sitting on the front row, there isn't any amount of money that could
That
make
can bring
you want to
it back.
sit in that seat.
Yes.
And so we just have to be careful as leaders in how we're guiding people through grief and loss. The church needs to have these types of ministries to
I
help
agree.
people. You have, guidelines, for the ushers or the women's ministry or the men's ministry. And it's like pastors, they do funerals probably every week, So it's like, why don't you have these types of things, in your ministry? But what's needed, God would raise up those who will help bring it forth to the church. And that's what we're here to do,
Amen. Amen.
because you're having an event. So we're going to go into that. You're having an event on March the 23rd. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, I am so excited. The event is called Becoming Her, and her represents healed, empowered, and restored. And so this is going to be about grief and loss, not only just for your loved ones, but also for health, your career, a home, finances, significance, or the trauma of transition. And I am super excited. It is March 23rd. It is at 12 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time, and it's in person. It's going to be at 1350 Blair Drive, Suite F, Odenton, Maryland, and I am super excited that Evangelist Wanda Briscoe is going to be with me. We are going to basically do some exercises with you. We're going to give you some tissue. You're going to be writing letters. I mean, we have such a great session that we're going to have with you. And we're just looking forward to each and every one of you. You can go on www.purposepusher.inspire.com. And for those, for general admission, it is $55. This is going to include your package. And those who have already became, like connected to becoming her, your price is only $40. So we're excited. Evangelist
Excited.
Wanda, I'm excited. It's going to be such an inspirational workshop for those who have had any type of grief and loss. And we just want everyone out there, if you are available on March 23rd, come and see Evangelist Wanda and Pastor Jacqueline as we help you,
Yes.
push you through grief and loss.
Awesome. And then we have something else coming up. Let me remove this on May the 17th. I am people are registering now. For this event, and it's going to be on Friday, May the 17th, and Wanda Briscoe Ministries presents Grief and Loss webinar for caregivers.
Yes.
There's even a misconception for caregivers, because when people think you're a caregiver, it's like you're caring for, someone that is just maybe a sickness, like a physical sickness, but you can be caring for someone who with dementia, Alzheimer's. We're going to give people tips on how to get through it. You could be caring for someone who has traumatic brain injury.
Yes.
You're a caregiver, and that's a lot, because they're not who they were before this injury. And it's how do you get through it? Self-care tips. That's important when you're going through grief and loss, through anything. Where's your self-care? Where's your self-care, period? But, and then you're going to be speaking, and you're going to talk about what you as a caregiver. And then we're going to have a testimony by Ashley Mayfield.
Yeah.
So you can go to my website, wandabriscoe.com, and register. People are registering already. And it's going to just be, we're here to educate people.
Yes.
And to let people be healthy in their grieving process.
Yes.
So I'm just thankful to God for this divine connection. Oh, one more thing. Congratulations to Pastor Jacqueline Duncan and her husband they'll be getting the Presidential Lifetime Award in Dallas, Texas on April the 21st. So I will be there as well, because I'm also getting.
Yay! Congratulations to you as well.
Look how God just connected us. Isn't that something?
Yes.
That is amazing.
Yes. So I will be seeing you in Dallas in April.
Yes. And I just look forward to, doing more with you on this topic, and, even reaching out to different ministries. And, like I said, I wrote the SOPs, and just helping them to get started with bereavement ministry in their, churches, and training their leaders, because it is so needed.
Yes, it is.
Much needed.
Yes. So, Evangelist Wanda, if there is a church, as I said, pastors' wives or pastors that are listening to us, I'm just going to encourage you to reach out. Reach out to Evangelist Wanda or myself. And, I know we used to do it the wrong way. We used to basically didn't have the understanding or education that we had 20, 30 years ago concerning grief and loss. And so we have been in school, we've been learning, we've been educated, we got the certificate to show it.
Yes.
So we want you to reach out to either one of us to let us know that you want us to come to your church.
Yes.
So we can educate your leaders, so we can educate your members on grief and loss and how to process it. how
Yes.
to get the tools to overcome those areas that they are needing. Because I believe there are members in your churches that are grieving right now and they don't know what to do.
Yeah.
They don't know where to go. But we're here
We're
as a grief and loss counselor to help them.
Amen. Thank you so much, Pastor Jackie, for joining me on tonight. For someone that is watching and they're going through grief and loss right now, what would you say to encourage them?
If there's someone out there now, again, reach out. Reach out. You do not have to suffer alone. I believe God allowed you to hear what we're talking about on this evening because He wants to help you. God has not forgotten you.
No.
He doesn't want your heart to be hardened. He doesn't even want your heart to continue to hurt from the things that you are experiencing even right now. It's okay not to be okay,
Yes.
but He wants you to get the help that you need so you won't stay stuck.
Mm.
And so I encourage you just to reach out. Reach out and say, hey, I'm the one that's still grieving. And some people 10 years ago, you're still grieving. And so we want to help you. So if you just reach out to one of us, guess what? We're going to be there for you and we're going to take you through the process so you can get through it and be
Yes.
on the other side of it. So
Amen.
that's something that I would share with them.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone who is watching on YouTube and on Facebook. Thank you for the comments. We truly appreciate you. If you want counseling, you can reach my website is wandabriscoe.com. Reach out. Let's grieve healthy. Let's get through this together. If you can attend the event that's going to be on March the 23rd, we would love to have you. As Pastor Jackie
Yes.
said, we're going to do workshops. We're going to have plenty of tissue and just let you get it out. You don't have to hold it in, and give you plenty of hugs. I'm a hugger. So it give you plenty of hugs. So I am just thankful for everyone that has joined on tonight, and even those who will come back and watch the replay. And so also remember, my motto is to live out loud. Even through this, live, honey, live. Live. Thank you. And until next time, may God keep you in his arms. May he comfort you. If you're going through grief, may he hold you in his arms. And I just thank you for tuning in, and I just thank and praise God for Dr. Jackie. It's just a joy to my heart. I mean, I'm just thankful for the Kingdom Connections and all that God is doing with Wanda Briscoe Ministries, and how he's just putting me more out on the forefront through the grief and loss. And I'm just
Amen.
thankful that he trusts me and is trusting me with souls to heal and to get through it. So until next time, good night, everyone.